Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stackelhouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse, and today I have another bonus episode for you. Back in April, I was interviewed by Adam Devaney for the Loving Our Life's Work podcast, where Adam shares stories of inspiration and purpose. In the episodes, Adam and his guests, like me, we explore our purpose, authenticity, and the transformative power of self-discovery. This is a side of my story I don't share very often. Usually, you'll hear me talking about my fibromyalgia and how I found ways to improve my fibromyalgia to the point where I am in remission today. But what you don't often hear me talk about is how I came to be doing the work that I do today, helping you feel better, and how that really, truly is my life's work. I exist on this earth to encourage hope, particularly for the fibromyalgia community, for you. It is my passion to help patients like you to know that you can feel better, that there is so much more that can be done to treat fibromyalgia, and that feeling better is possible. Now, today's bonus episode is my conversation with Adam about my journey to discovering my life's work. I also want to clear up one thing about the statistics you'll hear me share with Adam right at the beginning of this episode. This interview was recorded back in April. And as we geared up for Fibromyalgia Awareness Month in May, I ran across some updated statistics, which are different than what you'll hear me say to Adam. And you may have even heard me use these updated statistics on recent episodes. So to make sure there's no confusion, I wanted to give those updated stats here again. The NIH shows 6.4% of the U.S. population being diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Since fibromyalgia seems to affect more women than men, this works out to, again, according to the NIH, 7.7% of women in the U.S. and 4.9% of men here in the U.S. With these updated statistics, it means that 1 out of every 13 women is diagnosed with fibromyalgia. This is almost twice as many as the statistics that I gave to Adam in this interview. Now, if you're listening to this episode because you're searching for your life's purpose, one additional resource that I want to share with you is my book, The Fibromyalgia Coach. I wrote that to share the process I went through to figure out what kind of work was best suited to my new fibro life. I cover in there 8 key questions that I thought through as I was thinking about the kind of work I wanted to do. And I've laid them out for you to help you think through them as well. Things like, how social do you need your work to be? What kind of reward or meaningful outcome do you need to have to feel like the work you're doing matters? Or does it not matter that it matters? What are your unique sets of skills and preferences, physical and mental needs, and so on? So the answer for me to these questions, of course, was being a fibromyalgia coach. And this has been the answer for a lot of my students and graduates, of course. And I do share about that process in the book as well. But really, the answers to those 8 key questions will help you find your work, whatever it is that it's supposed to be. And if you already do know what your life's purpose is, and if you have a big dream but feel like fibromyalgia is getting in the way, know that you can feel better. You can accomplish big things. And like I say at the end of my interview with Adam, it just might need to look a little bit different. You just might need a little bit of help to figure out how to feel better and then how to create that life that you want to be living. If you want to download a free copy of my book or learn more about how working with a coach can help with this process, just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com, click on resources in the main menu, and you'll find the Find a Coach link and both of my books for free available there. Now, enjoy my conversation with Adam from the Loving Our Life's Work podcast.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Filled with stories of inspiration, Loving Our Life's Work podcast shares examples of courage, perseverance, and triumph. Our guests are examples of people who are actively living their life's purpose, and they've come to share with us the vision of their life's work so that we can learn to give ourselves permission to live ours. Now, if you feel like you've gained some inspiration from this podcast, or we've added value to your life or your world in some way, please subscribe, follow us for more content, comment, hit thumbs up, all that stuff on this podcast, and share it, of course, with someone you know who would also benefit from hearing this amazing story. And I'm positive that today you're going to have people you know in your life that you're going to want to share this podcast with. Now, Loving Our Life's Work podcast is a part of the vision of the Life's Work Positivity brand. If you want to learn more about our coaching programs, please follow the link below to watch our masterclass free of charge. Our free public podcast interviews are available on YouTube and Spotify and are out on the first of every month. I'm Adam Devaney, clinical social worker, founder and CEO of the Life's Work Positivity brand. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Tami Stackelhouse. Tami does all she can to give fibromyalgia patients the knowledge, care, and support they need to thrive. A fibromyalgia patient herself, Tami has gone from disabled to having her fibromyalgia in remission. How many people can say that? This led her, of course, to finding her purpose as a calling to share this with people all over the world, which led to the founding of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute, where she's a certified fibromyalgia coach and trainer. Tami has written 2 award-winning books, including Take Back Your Life, and even hosts the Fibromyalgia podcast. Welcome, Tami.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you here. It's hardly anybody knows nobody that has fibromyalgia. I mean, we all are just, 1 or 2 people removed from someone who's afflicted. How many people are afflicted with fibromyalgia in the world? Give me some of the stats.
Yeah, so it affects the CDC stat is 6.8% of the world's population, which is millions. If you do the math, to bring it down to something that's a little more, that you can wrap your head around, it's about 1 in 21 women. It does affect women more than men. So, 1 in 21 women is really the main stat. But I think as we go along, as we get more men diagnosed, I think we're going to find that it's pretty split 50-50 men and women. But the stats right now lean a little more on the women's side. So, yeah. So, yes, we all know somebody, even if you don't know, you know them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And even if that someone hasn't been formally diagnosed with it yet, because that is
absolutely
often a challenge I hear from my friends about getting properly diagnosed for really autoimmune diseases such as fibromyalgia. It is technically an autoimmune disease, right?
There's some research that says there's an autoimmune component, but there's other things that say that it's more of a central nervous system issue. That's actually part of the problem with fibromyalgia, and part of the problem with getting diagnosed is that we're sort of an illness without a home. We're stuck in rheumatology, but it's not really that. No, neurologists don't know what to do with us. So yeah, that's part of what we need to figure out about fibromyalgia is what exactly is this? What causes it? And then how do we get better? Right?
Yeah. And your story goes back 15 or more years. Really, when in your book, you talk about how really you seem to have really settled on the the reality that you've experienced this most of your life on some level.
Yeah.
But about 15 years ago, something for you really shifted. And would you mind sharing that story with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of give people a little bit of a timeline, when I was diagnosed in 2007, and for that first couple of years, not a whole lot happened. It was kind of treading water, trying to get through the day, right? I even got to a point where I decided I needed to file for disability because I really couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't take care of my house. Like, that's what disability is for. So I filed for disability in 2008. And in 2009, I had this vision of where my life was going. And it wasn't the direction I wanted it to go. It was like, everything's downhill from here. And that's not a nice place to be, right? So I went to my doctor and I said, this isn't what I want for my life. What else can we do? And she introduced me to a health coach in her office, and working with that coach over the next 6 months, like, everything changed for me. And that's when I finally started to improve, not just tread water, but actually get better. And then eventually, became a coach and decided I wanted to pay that gift forward to people. But that was really, for me, the turning point, was that vision that I had, just, a split moment of, if I don't do something different, that's the life I'm going to end up with. Right.
What was the feeling in that moment? What, if you could name the emotions in that moment? It sounds like it was probably a complex mix of them. What names would you put on those? What were you feeling at that moment?
The first thing that pops into my head is dread, right? Like, that's not what I want. And yet it also seemed so inevitable, because I was doing everything that I knew how to do. And so I knew something had to change, but I had no idea what that thing could be. So I think dread is a very, not really afraid of it, but like, this is inevitable. It's going to be bad. I'm not going to like it. Here we go.
And dread is a powerfully dark emotion.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it is a sticky, gooey darkness that once you get it on you or in you, it is hard to get rid of that one. It's very sticky, sticks around and causes mischief, and nothing good comes of it because it's a very weak emotion. And so you having that moment, you decided that just was not the route you were going to go.
No.
It's those moments in life that really, where we attach meaning, create a vision, and purpose, and your life's work. Those things have the potential to come out of those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And your story is clearly no different. And you talked a little bit with me about your relationship with that doctor and that coach, because they were pretty influential in you pivoting at that time.
Yes.
What were those relationships like? Were those are obviously inspirational and influential relationships. So can you tell the audience about how that how those relationships were and how they affected you? Because you're coming out of a really dark place at that point.
Right. Exactly. So the doctor that I had at the time, she was the one that diagnosed me. And though we didn't have, like, we use the word relationship, obviously we did have a relationship. I was her patient, but like, that was the relationship. I was her patient. But she was the first person who said, I know what's wrong. I know what to do with this. Right. And there, like, we talk about dread, but on the other side of that now is hope. And that is such a powerful thing. Like, that's what I'm here for, is to encourage hope for people. And that's what she did for me. Just, I know what this is. I know what to do about this. Here you go. Here's some tools. Let's, work on getting you better. And that's just amazing. Right. So that was the doctor relationship. And then the coach, it was really interesting because she actually didn't know anything about fibromyalgia. But she was so willing to listen. She was so willing to learn and to have her support her, to be able to bounce ideas off of. This didn't go so well. I ended up in a flare. What could I have done differently? Or why am I not doing these things that I know that I need to do? Right. And really just having that person 100% on my side to help me get where I wanted to go. And there were times where she sort of held that vision for me. I remember at one point she asked me, where do you want to be in 5 years? That's such a coach question we all ask, right? And I remember answering her and saying, 5 years? I don't even know how I'm going to feel in 5 days. So we kind of came up with this. Every day I do what I'm supposed to do. Every day I follow my plan, I feel a little bit better. And just the idea was, okay, we'll just string along a bunch of those days. And I know that she held for me this vision of what 5 years down the road could look like. We never talked about it, but just the way that she interacted with me, I knew that she was holding that space, right?
It's amazing when people hold space for us. It's such a precious gift when someone will hold that vision, and even when you falter, you go to them and they've still got that for you.
Yes.
That is absolutely the healer in the room right there.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you go back and we talked about your doctor, right? Well, you're so often when people have fibro or they have Sjogren's or they have other diseases that are similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get stuck in rheumatology.
Yep.
And the rheumatology doctors are really good at one maneuver. And that's when you ask them a question and they kind of go, don't really know. It's kind of like my experience with endocrinology has been very similar there. It's kind of like, well, we don't really know, right?
Yeah.
But if they have a belief that you can heal from this, that you can go into remission, or that you can improve the quality of your life, and they're dedicated to that, that is a great person to have on your side, even if they do a lot of this.
Right, exactly. Because let's be honest, there is a lot that we don't know, right? So there is a lot of that, but that doesn't mean we can't also know things that we can do to get better, right? Like we don't know what caused fibromyalgia, but I know a lot of stuff that'll help get better, right? So living in that gray space between knowing all the answers and
and as a patient, it's kind of the lived experience of people to live in that space themselves, right? Like they don't have all the answers. They just know kind of what's going on, and some days they feel good, and sometimes they really don't.
Right.
And it's up to the patient to manage that on some level. You told a story about being in it was one of the British Isles. Where was it?
It was in Scotland. Mm-hmm.
Scotland. And I'd really like you to share that story with our audience. And the reason I want you to share that story with our audience, because this podcast is all about giving people permission.
Yes.
Okay. To take care of themselves, to live their dreams, to cast a vision for their life, right? And how do you do that? I'm telling you, self-care is
everything.
It. Right. Yep. Without that, you don't have anything. So please share that story with our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally agree with you. Like self-care is kind of the answer to almost everything. But most people don't have a good idea or a good model of that. So I think one of the things that we can do as individuals is when we're practicing our own good self-care, we're doing that obviously to take care of ourselves, but the other side of that coin is we're doing it so that other people can take good care of themselves, right? And so the story you're talking about, I had gone to Scotland with a group of coaches and authors. Our publisher was hosting an event, and it was like 3 days long. It was, from the time we got up to going to bed late, like it was, retreat, right? And so there's a lot a lot going on. And I still have fibromyalgia. It might be in remission, but I also know I need to like not push myself. I want to stay feeling good, right? So I'm really conscious of how I spend my energy. And on that first day that we were there, our publisher had brought over some Highland dancers to teach some Highland dance. And I participated a little bit, but mostly I just watched. And I did that because I knew this is the first day, right? I can't give it all on the first day. I've got to hold some back for the other few days. And I had a lot of people ask me, you know, are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, I am totally fine. I'm just saving my energy. And as the retreat went on, there were a lot of instances like that where I chose to participate maybe in a smaller way than other people were. And by the end of the retreat, a woman came up to me and she said, you know, I've been dealing with this medical issue. Actually, even before I came to this retreat, I've been dealing with this issue and I've just kind of been ignoring it. But watching you take care of yourself, I've scheduled an appointment with a doctor. I'm leaving the retreat early. I'm going to go get this taken care of, get this looked at. And I thought, how powerful is that? I mean, I never even, of course, I talked to her, but we didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about what was going on with her. You know, she didn't ask me questions like, how do you take good care of yourself or anything like that. It was just truly by watching me take good care of myself, gave her permission to go take care of this medical issue she'd been dealing with.
That's so awesome. I love that. And the reason I love that is that we never really know who's watching us.
Yep.
There are people who are out there, and I say this to our audience, right? There are people out there hoping you win. There are people watching you because if you win, they'll give themselves permission to win.
Right.
And that is awesome. And we never know who those people are.
Yep.
Until sometimes they come up to us and they're like, you know what, you inspired me to do this. And you're like, oh, I wasn't even trying.
Exactly. I did. How did I do that?
I just being me, you know, like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and how powerful a thing is that, right? Inspiring people just by being yourself. Right. And I think that actually is the answer. The more of ourselves we can be, I mean, we all have our own light to bring to the world, right? And when you try to be somebody else, you're clouding that. So the more you that you can be, the better it is for all of us.
You know, and the listeners of this podcast will know there's a thread that seems to have shown up and weaved itself through all of my episodes. And that is the thread of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Of so many factors in our lives, almost all of civilization itself is trying to get us to veer off of and drift off of who we are. It almost seems like every force in the world, it seems to be designed to try to get us to do that in one form or another. And when we can stay as close to that path as possible, and when we can be as to the best of our ability and our authentic self, therein lies our path.
Mm-hmm.
Therein lies all our blessings, all our stuff that is effortless, like the wind blowing or the grass growing.
Yes.
Right? There are inputs to that, but it's still it's going to happen. And that's where we find our purpose. That's where we find our life's work. That's the space we can hold for ourselves to cast our vision for our life. And we never know who's watching.
Never know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that story because, there was another person that was hurting and they were looking at you for permission to not hurt.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And there you were, just being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And you inspired them. I love that. So who else have you met in your journeys along this path? Because you like as a therapist, right? Like I interact with all kinds of great and wonderful and talented therapists. Like who else have you have you met? And once you were there, once you had that vision, and once you knew what you were going to do, and then all the things started coming in and lining up because you were holding that vision, who came into your space that just continued to inspire you?
Oh my goodness, so many people. I mean, of course, and you know this as a therapist, my clients, right? I have learned so much from them, and it is such an honor to watch their lives transform. Just how brave they are, how open they are to trying new things. Like, it's just every day I am reminded of what I need to do as I help my clients, right? And I feel like that is part of the key to me having my fibromyalgia in remission, is because I'm working with people every day who are also working on it. Right. So it's a great accountability piece, but also just to kind of keep you inspired, keep you motivated, keep you doing the thing, because there are no days off when you have a chronic illness. Like, it's not like you can go take a vacation. And so after a while, it gets hard. And being in that community, that definitely helps. So I definitely would say that my clients are a huge piece of that. I've also met, of course, a lot of really amazing doctors who are actually helping this community. And I'm honored to be able to call some of them friends, doing things that aren't work things, actually being able to be friends with them has been such a cool thing. And building those relationships in such a way that, not just on a personal level, but also more on a professional level. Like, I can text a cell phone number and say, "Hey, I have this question. Can you help?" And that's such an amazing resource. And just the generosity that they have inspires me to also be generous. Right. And then the advocates, the other fibromyalgia advocates. I just did an interview yesterday for my podcast with one of these women who is going to Capitol Hill, meeting with legislators to get more funding for fibromyalgia. And things like that. I mean, we all have our own role to play, our own part to do. So I'm not going to say I couldn't do that. That just doesn't happen to be part of what my mission is, but it's hers. And her passion and her drive to accomplish this, to change research, change how doctors are taught, change all of these things. It's amazing, and it inspires and kind of keeps my own passion, my own flame burning brightly. My area, of course, is helping the individual patients, but it's all part of the bigger picture. And I will say too, fibromyalgia is how I met my best friend. So. We were at a conference together, sat next to each other, and it's been amazing.
That's awesome. So great things happen when you are in the act of service to
others. Yeah.
Great things. Like, the stars just seem to line up when you're in service to others.
Yes.
And every day I do some journaling every day. And the third thing that I write in my journal every morning is, I always show up with a servant's heart.
Yeah.
Why do I write that? That's not my natural state. At least that's not how I was socialized, or like, that's not the person that came out of the socialization in my society. But it is the ideal. It is the ideal. It is what reminds me to be that person and to show up as that servant. And when we're in service to other people, the ability for us to have that focus off ourselves for a little bit. I say this as a psychotherapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is so liberating on a heart level.
Yes.
To be in service to other people. And then to be able to surround yourself with other servants. What a wonderful gift to a life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just sort of amplifies the positive effect.
Yes, yes. If you think about, we're the average of the 5 people, around us, whatever that
Oh, we
saying
are.
is. Um, who are you surrounding yourself with? Right. So speaking as a fibromyalgia patient, a chronic pain patient, it is easy to surround yourself with negativity because this isn't fun. Right. Being in pain is not fun. It is easy to end up with those people closest to you being people who are also maybe complaining about being in pain. It's one of the struggles I have with a lot of support groups is that, we're just sitting around talking about how bad we feel. And I want to move out of that place, right? I want to move forward. So how do you then surround yourself with people who are thinking that way? How do we, yes, embrace the situation that we're in because we have to do that, but also how do we move forward out of this place? How do we make our lives better? How do we feel better? How do we, how do we solve this? How do we fix this? And looking at I always tell people, your world doesn't revolve around your fibromyalgia. It actually revolves around your healing.
I think what you're getting at when you're talking about that is that we as humans, because of the way that our brains are structured and the way that our 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 ego works, not in the bravado sense, but just in the general ego sense, the way it works is we like to create narratives around things. And if by chance our narrative begins to drift in the direction of victimhood, it can kind of spiral out of control. And then the ego kind of grabs onto that, becomes our identity. And when that happens, we really fall into negativity.
Mm-hmm.
And that that narrative that over identifies with the suffering,
right,
is so destructive. It's why in my therapy practice, I don't do group work because groups kind of tend to go that way. And I am extremely solution oriented. And so there was some research that was done on coping strategies. And what they found was that there was generally speaking, there were two types of ways that people coped. One was what we call emotional coping. Right? Emotional coping is really highly identifying with the emotion, wanting to express the emotion, the need to be heard and validated. And the other coping style was solution oriented. And the interesting thing with the two is that both people who are using one style or using the other style are still experiencing the same emotion. Is what they're doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that solution oriented coping is way more functional.
Yeah.
It turns out that those people actually have much better lives, right? And much more functional lives, and by several metrics that they used in the study. And that people who focus on the emotion as their way of coping, kind of in a sense have a higher chance of just eventually repressing that emotion, because there's no solution, there's no letting that go, there's no release to that. It's just emoting for the sake of emoting. And I feel for people who do this. I see this in my clients on a regular basis, and I work to move out of that. That's part of the cognitive behavioral therapy. But when people are suffering from a serious illness, that's the trap.
Mm-hmm.
There's a trap there, and people can get stuck in that trap. And I'm sure that you've seen it in your work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's not like this is something, like having the flu where you're going to be sick for a few weeks, or even breaking a bone where you're going to, have to deal with it for, maybe even a couple of months. This is for the rest of your life. Even having my fibromyalgia in remission, it's something that I'm still always thinking about how do I stay there? Right. And how is this thing going to affect me? How is that thing going to affect me? If I start to feel like I'm sliding, how do I get back to my baseline? It's always there. Right. And so it can, of course, it can be very easy to get caught up in the, pain 24/7, being exhausted, the brain fog, all of it. Right. And then we go to doctors who don't know what to do with us. Right. And that doesn't help either. So yeah, it's very, very easy to get trapped there. And I think that that's part of why this is so much of a mission for me, is to get that information out there that it doesn't have to be that way. There are things that can be done to feel better. It's possible. Give you a little bit of that hope.
and so on that topic, so you filed for disability in 2008, right?
Right. Yep.
And then you found the support, the coaching, the elements that you needed. And we'll talk a little bit about all those different elements in a little bit. But I want you to share with our audience what it was like when your disability finally went in front of the judge in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that day.
Oh, gosh. So, I mean, I filed disability because I needed to. The moment I made that decision, I was sitting on my stairs. I was trying to vacuum them because we had company coming the next day. I was in the same pajamas I'd been wearing for a week, and I just started bawling. And I'm like, I can't take care of myself. I can't take care of my house. Like, okay, maybe this is what disability is for. So, and then fighting that, like it's a process to get disability. And at the same time, not stopping trying to get better, right? Like that's also a tricky thing. Here I am filing to say I'm disabled and I'm also trying to get better, So when I got the notice that it was time, finally had a hearing in front of the judge, I thought to myself, what am I doing? Because I feel so much better, right? And it was just I don't know, so many emotions, right? Feeling a little bit like a fraud, right? To be honest, because at that stage I was not disabled, right? And I did not know at the time, but just for anybody who's listening, you can file for disability for a period of time. And I did not know that until many years later, but I could have gone in and said, I was disabled from this time to this time. I'm not now, but I was, and you can file that way. But yeah, it was so hard. And it was like I said, such a mix of emotions. On one hand, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself, right? Because I've come so far from where I was when I first filed that. On the other hand, I'm feeling like a little bit of a fraud. Why am I even showing up here? I'm also feeling super frustrated with like what I'm hearing from the judge and the other experts that they have there. I'm like, you don't understand fibromyalgia at all. So it was, oh my gosh, it was a whole thing. But once that was over, I mean, I was kind of glad that it didn't go through, because then like it could just be done. I could set it aside, move forward, like we're done. Don't have to worry about that anymore. But it was such a weird day. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I had a good friend going through the disability process, and she, I remember having a conversation with her. She'd been denied the first time, like everybody.
Yep.
And she was appealing that, and she was actually, I believe, deciding if she was going to appeal that. And I just looked at her one day and I said, your health has just been horrible since you started this process.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this process of you proving that you're disabled hasn't actually led to you feeling worse. And my friend was like, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And I love my friend, and that's why I told her that. I didn't like to see that happen. And so she withdrew her first appeal, and then she eventually, it was pretty clear that, this was what was warranted, that she really needed to get on some SSI, and she hired herself a lawyer, and she got it a couple of years later. But it's that narrative. It's that that the narrative of victimhood, and it is a difficult trap to get out of. It takes a lot of bravery to get out of that, and a lot of courage and integrity to be able to look at yourself and say, hey, I'm willing to accept that this is what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so in your case, you'd already started feeling better.
Yep.
And you said it twice. You said, I felt like a fraud.
Yeah. And also kind of not, because there was a reason I filed, right? Like I would not have filed if I felt like I didn't need to. But then, getting better, and it was just such a mix of everything. So hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, of course, in disability, anybody who's gone through that process, then, there are experts, right, who give opinions, and you're like, do you even know anything about this?
No.
And that can be frustrating for people. I've been through that process with a couple of friends, and it is difficult. But so is being trapped in a narrative. Because one of the things that you wrote about in your book, and it was something that I was aware of as well, but it was nice to see it in your book, about how fibromyalgia is often triggered to amplify by some sort of traumatic experience, right?
Yes.
And it could be like let's see, chronic stress.
My story.
Stressful job or living situation. That was your experience, right?
Yep.
Yeah. How many people are living that, right?
Yes.
Emotional trauma, right? A loved one dying, divorce, loss, right? Some sort of acute illness, pneumonia, right? Cancer, something like that. Physical injuries, like that kind of physical trauma, falling, motor vehicle accidents, surgeries, right?
Yep.
Especially when you're talking about, it doesn't say in here, but including anesthesia, which everybody responds to differently.
Yes.
And then, of course, the emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, which is all too common in our world, always has been.
Yeah. Trauma is such a trigger. And at the same time, genetics also plays a piece, because, of course, you can have two people go through the same thing. So talking about chronic stress, right? Like not everybody with chronic stress ends up with fibromyalgia. So there's clearly some other piece in there. But there always is something that sets off, flips the switch. Right? Some sort of trauma, mental, physical, emotional, an illness, whatever, that list you read. And often our healing comes through also dealing with that trauma. I had a client who was in a very, very severe car accident, broke almost every bone in her body, lost an eye. Like, it was very traumatic. And of course, there's emotions tied to that as well. And there's thoughts about our bodies, about the situation, about our pain. Like, it's never just the illness itself. It's all these other things too. And at the same time, there really are things going wrong in your body, right? So like, the ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences, a lot of people with fibromyalgia have high ACEs score. Mine happens to be 0. So, like I said, it's some kind of trauma, but not always not always the same. And, trauma's in the eye of the person it happens to, right? What's traumatic to me might not have been to you. So you also have to be sensitive to, what was traumatic for you about that. And, including that as part of your healing.
Yes, because trauma, loss, illness, right? Hurt, abuse, these sort of things. When we go through these things, I like what you said, that two people go through the same type of trauma and have two totally different experiences with it. And it's really, how do we handle those emotions? Right? And how we handle the emotion is going to be how we create our meaning around those experiences.
Right.
We are, as humans, meaning-making machines.
Yes.
It's our thing, right? And we have a very, very, very well-developed emotional center in our brain that sits right down below, our long-term memory, and then, of course, our overthinker, right? And so how we process those emotions in the long term is going to define our relationship with that trauma. I work with people all the time I work mostly with people on relationships, traumatic relationships, or relationships that had some sort of a loss in them, associated with them. And I work with people on a deep subconscious level. Okay? Because what happens is we have there's three parts, right, to a healthy relationship with emotions. Create the vibration of the emotion. We all know it's energy. Everything is. The air I'm breathing right now is energy. Mm-hmm. Everything we are. So, and emotions, it's energy in motion. It's emotion. It's what it is. So creates a vibration of the emotion in the body. We can do that ourselves, or we can pick that up from somebody, because that's our empathic blessing gift as humans, right?
Yep.
And a curse at times. Yes. And then we feel the emotion, right? And when we feel that emotion, that's our message. It's a simple message. It's really a binary message. Things are how we would like them to be in our environment, or things are not how we would like them to be in our environment. It's just a message. It's a messenger. And it is actually, I believe, a beautiful and wonderful messaging system, because it's very effective at getting the message across. Then, once we've got that message, the emotion serves no purpose. It just served us to get to the message, get the message, to learn the lesson, to get the message, right? Then we, in a healthy relationship with emotion, we release it. Like walking across the floor, carpet, in your socks, the first person that you touch, you're going to dissipate all that energy, right?
My cat gets that a lot. Poor Finn. I'm like, oh, dude, I just electrocuted you again.
Because that's the natural way that energy behaves. Yes. It's designed to behave that way. And so what happens is we don't get to that point in our emotional relationship, and we stuff it down, usually while we're feeling it. Okay, we're like, we either stuff it down and say, I can't deal with that right now, and just kind of muscle through it, or worse, we just kind of, we're like, okay, I'm just going to set this aside and I'll get to that later. And of course, we never do.
Right.
Ever. Right. And it doesn't store in any kind of like external hard drive. It's our body. Our subconscious is our body. It's our precious, precious body. And so what happens when we do that is we stuff it down into the body, right? Or in the case of addiction, right? We actually try to keep ourselves numb enough in some way that we never even really create the vibration in the first place. Okay, so if someone's suffering from severe panic attacks, first time they try, an oxycodone, boy, they're just like, where has this been all my life?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, wow. right? And it's all fantastic until suddenly it isn't. And that's the nature of addiction. Alcohol works the same way. Depressants and other people use stimulants because they're depressed. Point is that that's where addiction lies. That's trying to stop it there, right? There's a problem that happens when we stuff it down, right? We do this. That's what happens.
True story.
True story, right? It's not just going to sit there. It's going to sit there and it's going to cause mischief.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. My own, one of my favorite people in the entire world is a guy that I connected with through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. I connected with Steve back when I was like 13 years old, right? And we are still, we talk every day, okay? And 13 years old was a few years ago.
Yeah.
So
not yesterday.
And he was raised in a very alcoholic family, and he learned to stuff all of that emotion down into a little knot in his gut. And then when his wife and his mother, who was the alcoholic, were suddenly at odds, right? And he stuffed all of that down. 2.5 months after that, he got diagnosed with bowel cancer. Now the doctors snip, sewed it together, said, "Hey, Steve, you're cured." Right? My brother's like, "How did I get bowel cancer at 38? Right? That's when he learned that what he had done is he'd stuffed that down into that little knot all those years, and it had sat there and it had caused mischief.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's one way that we deal with emotion. And that's one way that illnesses then rear their head. Those energies are just there causing mischief. And fortunately, my brother, good into that story, he eventually went to a retreat where he learned to look at the thing that was so scary and dark and bring it out into the light, show it some love. Learned it wasn't as scary as he thought it was all those years. Learned the lessons and released it. And that man is, I think, 62 now, and he'll still look at you in the eye and say, "I'll never get cancer again."
I love it.
And that's moving into that healthy relationship with emotions that can really transform someone's life.
And as you were talking about that, I would, thinking through the lens of a chronic pain patient, you could almost entirely substitute emotion for pain, like physical pain, right? How we deal with pain, or do we avoid it, right? Do we use avoidance behaviors? Do we self-medicate? Do we ignore it and push through anyway? Or do we befriend it? I mean, I'm not saying you can just let your pain go, right? Like there might be a reason for your chronic pain that's not psychosomatic, and maybe you've got degenerative disc disease or something, like who knows? But you can let go of all of the extra emotion we attach to that pain, right? The drama that we attach to it, what we think that pain means, we can let that go. And that actually reduces our pain levels, because we have a certain amount of pain and then we add all this other stuff on top of it. And when we can let go of what we've added, then we're back down to that lower level of pain. So a lot of what you said there would also apply to physical pain.
I love that. I was just working with a client yesterday who's had debilitating bulging disc in his back since just a couple of days after the holidays last year. He comes from a family that doesn't celebrate holidays. His first wife was a Jehovah's Witness. She didn't celebrate holidays. There's only like 2 kind of secular holidays that his new wife, celebrates. And so they were celebrating Thanksgiving, and then just, with like her family coming over and all the drama that came with that. And all of a sudden, a few days later, he couldn't get off the couch.
Mm.
And I'm like, have you considered that this might be emotional? And he said, it's like every time I argue with my wife, pain is a lot worse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I think we're onto something here. Right? Even his doctor said, I think there might be something emotional about this. And that is rare.
It is.
And you said something that you said the drama attached to that.
Yeah. That is how I think of it.
I love that, because for years now, I've had this working developmental theory. And that is, all childhoods are traumatic. Come on, let's just face it. Nobody comes into this world ready for this.
Mm-mm.
Society is a weird place. Okay. And then adolescence is where we live out the drama from the trauma.
True. Yep.
And we're free to do that until we die. In fact, it might even be argued that we're kind of an adolescent species.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some people that make it to adulthood. And what they do is they learn to do that inner work, to deal with that trauma, and then to release the drama behaviors. And those people are amazing. They become so connected with other people. They become servants. They become compassionate. That is the natural result of doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
But you can live out the drama from the trauma your whole life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Like, okay, you have fibromyalgia, you have chronic pain. Okay, maybe you're hurting 24/7. That is what it is. Right. But then do we have to, be upset about that? I mean, of course, you're grieving the life that you lost, but like, how long do you want to carry that around with you? We start worrying about, oh, can I be the mom I want to be? Can I be the sister, brother? Like, how can I be the friend that I want to be if I have this chronic pain? You start feeling like you're a burden to everybody else. You start feeling like you're missing out on everything. And yes, other people might have to take care of you. Yes, you might be missing out on things. But how we think about that changes our experience of the pain, literally. And I think it is just so important to make sure, first of all, I'm not saying that fibromyalgia is a psychiatric disorder. It is not. There's really things going on. And I don't think that you can just think your way out of fibromyalgia. Like, there are things that need to be fixed, but there's also a whole lot we're adding on to that and piling on to that we can fix and we can get rid of. So yeah, it's just it's an important thing to be able to face that. Like you were saying earlier, it can really feel like you're a victim to your illness, sometimes even a victim to your own body, right? And how do we shift away from that and take more control over our own lives and the choices that we make? And just that shift of why I'm making that choice from I can't because of to I choose not to because I want to feel better. Like, just that one shift changes everything.
And it's a little win. Right. And so one of the things I loved about your book, okay, and it's behind you, I know, and I'm going to put that up here. Take Back Your Life, people, right? Because there's a lot of philosophy in this. It's not just techniques. It's not just when you said in your book that there's no one thing that'll fix 100% of fibromyalgia. I was like, there's no one thing that'll fix anything.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Like life, right? And then you said, it's better to think about it and doing 50 things that give you 2% success
Yeah.
or something that gives you 4% success 25 times. And I thought, that is life.
Yes, it is. And how often do we give up on those tiny little wins, right? Because we are looking for the magic bullet. And so this didn't help enough. So it didn't work for me. Instead of keeping that and then, okay, now what can I add to it? Right?
Yeah, that's incredible. When I think about stacking little wins in life, when I put together my coaching program, I spent a year and a half stacking little wins. There was no big win.
Mm-mm.
And it was learning this app and learning that app and creating the copy for this and creating the mission to start with and holding that vision and doing a little bit here and a little bit there. It was all just stacking little wins.
Yes.
So it turns out treating fibromyalgia is a lot like treating life.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's how I ended up in remission. I mean, it wasn't like I went to some magical place and had some magical treatment and magically was in remission. It was the 2%, the 4%, the hanging on to every little bit that I could get. And how do we put this together? Same way with building a business, like you just said, when I started off, I did not think I was going to write 2 books and produce a movie and have a podcast and create a coaching. I probably wouldn't have started, let's be honest. Like that's a lot. But it was just, again, one step at a time, little bit at a time. I totally identify with the tortoise and the hare. Just keep going, very slow, very steady, just little bit at a time. If you're a, what about Bob fan, then, baby steps down the hall. That's how we do it. That is how it works.
Yeah. And that's when I started journaling in the morning. Okay. Started creating my morning discipline and ritual. I realized every time I did that, I was stacking little wins for the day already.
Mm-hmm.
When I get up and I get 32 ounces of water, then I stand in front of my infrared light for 15 minutes. Then I go get another 32 ounces of water and I sit down and I do my journal. I am stacking little wins. Each one of those things adds up over time. It's not like I'm going to have this big moment where, like, occasionally you get a few big wins. Occasionally. It's not the norm. Life really is a whole bunch of little wins, and you just got to stack those up and keep stacking them up. And, 52% wins is 100%.
Yeah. Exactly right. And how we, just as you're talking about your morning routine, like you probably didn't even start that whole routine all at once, right? Like maybe you started drinking a cup of water and that was the whole routine, right? And so we stack those habits that are all, it's just a way to multiply those little wins that we can get. So, if you're listening and you're thinking, oh gosh, that's nice that they're doing that. That's nowhere near where I am. Just that you have to start where you are, right? What is that tiny 2% difference that you can make right now today that get you closer to where you want to be? And then, when that's good, add another thing,
Yeah, I love that. That is absolutely how you win in life. That's how you win in physical illness. That's how you win in life.
Yep.
And I love that. That who would have thought that that life and fibromyalgia were so similar?
I know, right?
So we're kind of coming to the end here. So I just want to say, do you have any last thing that you really want to share? Any last perspective that you really want to share with our audience that just means a lot to you, and you really feel like you really need to get this across?
Yes. So first off, if you have fibromyalgia, no matter what you may have been told, you can get better. How much better depends on a whole lot of things. That's a whole nother podcast. The fibromyalgia podcast, by the way.
There'll be a link down below.
But do know you can get better. You probably need to do some different things. You probably need to have some new people on your team. A podcast, my books are a great place to start. Of course, we have coaches and things like that too. But the main thing I want you to know is that you can feel better. It is possible. Fibromyalgia is not a death sentence. And obviously you don't die from fibromyalgia, but you die with it, right? And doesn't have to be a death to life as you know it, right? The other thing that I want to say is, if you have a chronic illness, fibromyalgia, anything else, and you've got big dreams, you can still do them. It just might look a little different than the way everybody else does it, right? So don't let those things that have been handed to you be the end of your dreams. In fact, they can be the beginning of them. All of the things that I've done, I never would have done if I hadn't had fibromyalgia, right? If I hadn't gone through that process, if I hadn't been so sick that I had to file for disability, if I hadn't had that entire experience, I couldn't do what I do today. And so I think we can also just remember that sometimes our greatest pain is the greatest gift, right? Not necessarily that the pain itself is a gift, although it can be, but that the gifts come out of that, right? Because then I get to be the person for somebody else that I wish I had had at the beginning, right? And yeah. You can do anything you want to do. You just got to think about how, we might have to tweak it to make it a little bit, helpful for you. But go change the world, people. It's waiting.
It is waiting for you. It is absolutely. The world is out there waiting for you to make that difference. And Tami, I really want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your excitement, your enthusiasm, your wisdom, and your experiences with us today. And hopefully you've inspired others. I'm sure you have. I want to thank our listeners for listening to our show today. Of course, you can learn more about our guest by following the links below in the description. And as always, I want to remind you to search your heart, do the important inner work, and give yourself permission to find your purpose and live your life's work. Thank you again for listening today. And thank you, Tami.
And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.